It's not yet dawn in Portland, Maine, and the world outside is hushed under a slow, silent snow. The only light comes from the neon sign of Mariner's Diner, a faded blue anchor, barely flickering, slicing through the dark. Inside, it's a world of its own. Chrome stools worn thin by decades of regulars, walls lined with sepia photos of men in uniform, the air heavy with the scent of frying bacon and strong coffee. This is where Officer Eli Warren finds himself every morning, not out of habit, but because it's the only place that doesn't feel empty. Eli stands in the entryway, snow melting from his boots, uniform creased from another sleepless night. At his side, Sable, a 7-year-old German shepherd, ears alert, head held with a quiet dignity, scans the diner, nose twitching. The place feels different today. The regulars aren't here yet. There's no music, no hum of stories drifting from booth to booth. Just Mrs. Sarah Kinley, owner, widow, caretaker of the town's memory, frantically scrubbing the front window, her movements sharp and desperate. Sable approaches first, no hesitation. He sits quietly at Sarah's side, nudging her trembling hand with his nose. It's the gentlest of gestures, but it makes her freeze, brush dangling from her fingers. Eli sees the graffiti then, vivid red scrawled across the glass. "Cowards don't belong here. Time to go." Sarah's eyes are red, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. She's scrubbing hard, but the words remain, bleeding through. For a moment, neither she nor Eli speaks. The silence is heavy, broken only by Sable's soft whine. Eli kneels beside her, fingers brushing snow from the window's ledge. He doesn't ask what happened. He already knows. Small towns don't keep secrets for long, but they do keep wounds. Sarah's late husband, an Army sergeant killed overseas, was a fixture in this town. The diner had always been his second home, a sanctuary for veterans and anyone needing a warm meal or a listening ear. Now someone's decided it's time for her to leave. Not just the diner, but maybe the whole town. Sable rests his head on Sarah's lap, watching her with eyes that miss nothing. Eli sees something shift in her, the brittle mask slipping, replaced by an old, tired sadness. For a moment, Sarah lets herself break. She clings to Sable, tears wetting his fur, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why they're doing this. I thought we were safe here." Eli wants to offer comfort, but words fail. He feels the weight in his own chest, a memory of folded flags, late-night calls, the echo of his wife's laughter fading into hospital silence. He lost her 5 years ago to cancer. Since then, family means the K9 by his side and the fragile threads of connection he manages to keep from fraying. As the morning brightens, regulars begin to trickle in, old men in thick jackets, their steps slow, their eyes wary. They see the graffiti, but no one says a word. Instead, they offer Sarah small kindnesses, a hand on her shoulder, a mug refilled without asking, a whispered joke that doesn't quite land. Sable patrols the booths, accepting a scratch behind the ear here, a treat there. He circles back to Sarah, refusing to leave her side. Eli studies the graffiti again. It's not just mean, there's calculation in the words, a precision that feels personal. He glances at the door and the faint residue of something chemical near the lock, his senses prickling. This isn't random. Someone wants Sarah out, and they're willing to get ugly to make it happen. He moves through the diner, listening for what isn't being said. Sarah's hands shake as she pours coffee. The regulars keep their voices low. Fear and anger curl beneath the surface like a storm waiting for a crack in the sky. Sable stays on alert, tail twitching every time someone new walks in, His hearing, impaired but never useless, catching sounds Eli can't. The day drags on, snow piling up against the curb. Eli steps outside, glancing at the window again. The paint's still there. So is the question behind it. Who would do this, and why now? He feels a chill that isn't just the cold. Sable noses his hand, and Eli grips the fur at the dog's neck, steadying himself. He thinks of Sarah's late husband, of the promise this diner once made to every man and woman who needed a place to belong. He sees the pain in Sarah's eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he feels the old ache of wanting to fight back. Not for himself, but for someone who can't anymore. As the light fades, Eli sits at the counter with Sable at his feet, the town outside buried under the hush of winter. He knows this is just the beginning. The vandalism isn't random. The diner, this place of refuge, is at risk. And somewhere deep down, in the hollow places he rarely visits, Eli realizes that Sable knew it before anyone else. In the quiet, Sarah begins to clean up, her shoulders hunched, her voice softer than the snow outside. Sable watches her, eyes unblinking, as if promising, "You're not alone, not tonight." It was barely noon before the next blow landed. Sarah was wiping down the counter, shoulders squared, trying to look stronger than she felt. The regulars had settled into their rituals. Old Frank with his crossword, June quietly crocheting by the window, the usual morning radio chatter flickering in the background. Eli lingered at the front, talking quietly with Sable, but everyone in the room felt the tension, like a humming wire strung too tight. Sarah's eyes darted to the back office. That's when she saw it. The crisp white envelope resting on the counter, bold black letters spelling her name. She paused, knuckles pale, a pit forming in her stomach before she even opened it. Eviction notice. Pine State Development. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the paper. The words blurred. Failure to vacate will result in legal action. Sarah blinked hard, pressing her lips together, refusing to let her panic show. But Sable felt it. He always did. Before Eli even noticed the tremor in her voice, the German shepherd was already at her side, pressing close. Eli's brow furrowed. He crossed the room quietly, hand gentle on Sable's back, his own intuition sharpened by years of reading silences. "What's wrong, Sarah?" She couldn't speak at first. She just handed him the notice. Eli's jaw tightened as he read, pulse steady but eyes flashing with something cold. It wasn't just the graffiti. Now they wanted the diner. It was all happening at once. A sharp bark drew their attention. Sable had wandered to the back entrance, nose twitching, tail stiff. Eli followed. There, just outside the door, he found the lock smeared with some sticky, acrid substance hardening in the cold. The trash bins had been dumped, bags ripped open, garbage strewn across the alley. Something chemical lingered in the air. Sable sneezed, pawing at the snow. Eli crouched, gloved fingers brushing the glued lock, eyes scanning the alley for signs. A boot print, a tire mark, anything. He snapped a quick photo with his phone, then turned to Sarah. "You lock up last night?" She nodded. Double-checked. Everything was fine. "Somebody wants you out," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "And they're getting bold." Back inside, Sarah tried to focus on the rhythms of the diner. But it wasn't the same. Even the regulars felt it. Frank looked up, concern flickering behind his thick glasses. June reached across the booth, squeezing Sarah's hand in silent solidarity. Eli called in the incident, his voice low and measured. But he knew, small town or not, these things didn't always get solved. especially when the enemy was a corporation with deep pockets and slippery hands. Sable stayed by Sarah, refusing even his usual treat from Frank. Every movement in the diner made him tense. A fork dropped, a bell chimed. A stranger lingered too long at the door. He was a shadow, a guardian, a silent presence more reassuring than words. By mid-afternoon, the fear in the diner was nearly tangible. Sarah's mask of strength was slipping, cracks spreading in places she thought were solid. She excused herself to the storeroom, intending to catch her breath. That's where Eli found her. Head bowed, hands trembling, a silent storm raging inside. He didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway, Sable at his heel, waiting. For a long moment, Sarah wept, shoulders shaking, breath caught in her chest. Sable pushed in close, laying his head gently in her lap. She buried her hands in his fur, letting her grief and frustration spill out wordlessly. Eli looked away, giving her privacy, but the memory of his own lowest nights clawed at him. Sarah finally found her voice, barely more than a whisper. "They're using his memory against me, Eli. I get these messages, online, phone calls. They call him a coward, say the diner's a joke. I thought people would remember, would care." Eli's fists clenched. He felt something raw and angry flicker inside, something he usually kept buried. Sable nuzzled Sarah's hand again, as if telling her to hold on. "Don't let them take this from you, Sarah," Eli said, his voice gravelly but steady. "Your husband. He gave this town more than they know. You did too. This place matters." She nodded, wiping her eyes, drawing a shaky breath. That night, after closing, Eli lingered to help Sarah lock up, double-checking every door and window. Sable prowled the perimeter, nose to the ground, every sense straining for trouble. The streetlights outside buzzed against the falling snow, casting long shadows across the diner's windows. As Sarah turned the key for the last time, Eli caught her arm gently. "I'll keep an eye on the place tonight," he offered. "Just in case." She managed a tired, grateful smile. "Thank you, Eli, for everything." Outside, the wind howled down empty streets. Eli watched Sarah's taillights fade into the night. Sable pressed against his leg, eyes reflecting the neon glow of the diner. Together they stood sentinel, man and dog, both a little battered, both refusing to back down. Eli glanced back at the diner's front window, the graffiti still faint beneath the fresh coat of cleaner. He felt a knot of determination settle in his chest. Whatever storm was coming, they wouldn't face it alone. Inside the darkness, Sable circled once, settling at the door, his body relaxed but ready, as if promising, "Not on my watch." Eli's cruiser idled in the lot behind Mariner's diner, engine ticking as the heat seeped away. Snow drifted against the tires, swirling in lazy circles under the pale glow of the street lamp. Midnight in Portland, Maine. Most of the city long asleep, dreams rising and falling behind drawn curtains. But here, at the edge of the old port, two figures kept watch. A man who couldn't rest, and a dog who wouldn't let him. Sable sat alert in the passenger seat, head cocked, eyes locked on the windows of the diner. His ears, one still notched from old scars, flicked at the smallest sounds. Ice cracking, wind whispering through brittle branches. He pressed his nose to the glass, a low rumble humming in his chest. Eli watched too, hand resting lightly on Sable's shoulder. He hadn't meant to make a habit of these midnight patrols, but the night felt heavier now, the world off balance. Each hour he spent here, in this place that meant something to someone, felt like staking a claim against the darkness. The diner, once lively and warm, now huddled beneath the snow, its neon sign flickering in and out of focus. The windows, scrubbed clean by Sarah's shaking hands, still seemed to hold the ghost of that ugly red scrawl. Inside, everything was as it should be. Tables wiped down, chairs stacked, the last bits of hope tucked into the corners. Eli glanced at the clock. 12:47 a.m. He sipped stale coffee, eyes aching from lack of sleep. In the quiet, his mind wandered. Back to the desert, the long night watches, the taste of sand on his teeth and fear scratching at his bones. Back then, you learned to trust your senses and the soldier beside you. Now that trust belonged to Sable. A sudden movement, a shadow slipping through the alley. Sable's body tensed, tail stiff. Eli set his coffee aside, every nerve sharpening. He opened the door quietly, boots crunching on packed snow. Sable dropped out beside him, paws making no sound at all. Together, they approached the alley, Eli's flashlight slicing the darkness, Sable a silent shadow at his knee. A cat darted from behind the dumpster, tail high, eyes catching the beam. Sable's ears twitched, but he didn't bark. The alley was empty, save for fresh footprints melting into the slush. Not boots, sneakers, running. Eli snapped a quick photo, noting the tread pattern. Another sign, another warning. Back inside the cruiser, Eli tried to settle. The world felt tight around his chest. Too many memories crowding in. He remembered his wife's voice. Gentle, teasing, always pulling him back from the edge. He remembered the silence that followed her loss, the ache that became routine. Sable, sensing the shift, nudged his hand. Steady, warm here. Eli's thoughts returned to Sarah. Earlier that night, after the doors were locked, he found her sitting at the counter, a mug of untouched tea growing cold in her hands. She looked older, her face drawn with worry. He sat across from her, words slow to come. "You ever wonder why some places stick around?" Eli asked, fingers tracing circles on the formica. Sarah's lips pressed thin. "Maybe they mean more than we let on. This place, it's all I have left of him." Eli hesitated, gaze dropping to the counter. "I lost my wife 5 years ago. Cancer. Some days it feels like I'm still standing in that hospital room, waiting for her to come back. Didn't think I'd find a way out of that." He paused, the silence stretching. Sable, lying at their feet, raised his head, amber eyes meeting Eli's. "She saved me, in a way," Eli continued quietly. "But when she was gone, Sable kept me going, pulled me out when I wanted to give up." Sarah's eyes glistened, her hand reaching down to stroke Sable's fur. "You're lucky," she whispered, "to have someone or something that stays." They sat in the quiet, grief shared without fanfare. Just the clink of a spoon, the shuffle of paws on tile, the hum of the refrigerator in the back. It was enough. Later, on patrol, Sable grew restless. He whined, pacing the floor, nose pressed to the back door. Eli followed, flashlight scanning the alley. That's when Sable led him to it, a small object glinting in the snow, half buried near the dumpster. A silver Zippo lighter, cold to the touch. Eli brushed away the snow, squinting in the light. An engraving caught his eye, the logo of Pine State Development, sharp and unmistakable. He turned it over in his palm, the weight of it settling his suspicions. This wasn't random. The harassment, the eviction, the late-night threats, they were all connected, and someone wanted Sarah out badly enough to get their hands dirty. Sable sat at his feet, eyes never leaving Eli's face. The connection between them was silent, built over years of trust, failure, and forgiveness. Eli slipped the lighter into an evidence bag, mind whirring with questions. The night pressed on, cold and relentless, but inside the diner, there was a flicker of warmth, a promise that even in the darkest hours, someone was watching. Someone was guarding what mattered. Eli stood in the doorway, Sable at his side, both gazing out into the swirling snow. He didn't know how this fight would end. He only knew that as long as Sable was with him, as long as there was something worth protecting, he'd keep watch. Tomorrow would bring more battles, but tonight, the diner, this fragile refuge, was safe. Mornings at Mariner's Diner were once simple things. Sarah humming quietly as she prepped the griddle, the bell above the door jingling its welcome, the world slipping easily into place with every cup of coffee poured. Now, that ease was gone. The quiet felt stretched, thinner each day. The booths, lined with old photographs and sun-faded American flags, seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to break. Sarah arrived before sunrise, breath steaming in the cold. She paused at the door, key in hand, listening to the muffled crunch of snow beneath her boots. For a heartbeat, she considered not unlocking, not stepping inside, just turning away and letting the storm, whatever it was, have its way. But she pressed on, as she always did. Inside, she set to work, eyes darting to every shadow, nerves frayed. She tried to tell herself it was just another bad patch, but the eviction notice was still folded in her purse, weighing down every step. She called her lawyer, voice trembling only slightly. "They can't do this, can they?" she asked. He listened. He cared, but his answer was the same. "It's complicated, Sarah. The evidence of harassment helps, but Pine State has deep pockets and a long reach. The property title's messy, and the courts, they don't move fast." Sarah thanked him, voice soft, and hung up. She stood in the empty storeroom, the loneliness settling around her like dust. She looked at the shelves, cans of beans, bags of flour, old jars labeled in her husband's careful print. Every item was a memory, every memory a weight. The regulars came and went in hushed waves, their faces kind but uncertain. Old Frank pressed a $10 bill into her hand for luck. June offered to help sweep. Everyone meant well, but their worry was like static, buzzing in the air. By midday, Sarah had filled 3 boxes with mementos, her husband's army cap, a faded Polaroid of them dancing in the parking lot, the old brass bell he'd installed on their first day as owners. Each item was a goodbye, each one a shrinking of her world. She tried not to let the tears come. She had survived worse. She had endured the long months after the funeral, the nights when grief pressed so close she could hardly breathe. She had learned to live with absence, but this, losing the diner, the last thing tying her to the man she loved, felt different, like a door closing she could never pry open again. Sable watched her closely, never straying far. When she lingered too long at the window, he pressed his head into her palm, silent and steady. When she moved to the back room, he followed, paws soft on the tile, amber eyes watchful. He seemed to know, in the way only dogs do, what she needed and when. That afternoon, as the snow fell thick and quiet outside, Sarah found herself in the storeroom again. A draft curled beneath the door, the lights flickered, and she shivered. She sat heavily on an overturned crate, Sable's head resting on her knee. Her gaze drifted to the old military footlocker wedged beneath the shelves. She hadn't touched it in years. It was battered, scuffed by a lifetime of moves, the brass clasp dull with age. Sable pawed at it gently, as if urging her to notice. She hesitated, running her fingers along the lid. Memories surfaced. A young couple in a cramped apartment. Dreams bigger than their budget. Her husband's laugh, deep and full. The footlocker had always been his. He'd called it the vault, a safe place for the things that mattered most. Sable pawed again, more insistent. Sarah blinked, then reached for the latch. It stuck, protesting with a squeak, then gave way. She lifted the lid, breath catching. Inside were layers of the past, her husband's medals, his discharge papers, a faded flannel shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar. At the very bottom, beneath a stack of old letters, she found a thick envelope marked Diner Founding Documents. She unfolded the papers, hands trembling. The print was old, the signatures careful. She scanned the words, eyes widening. There, in legalese but unmistakable, was a clause. This property shall serve as a sanctuary for veterans and their families. Its status protected in perpetuity under City Statute 28B, Section 4. Her heart pounded. She read it again, slower this time. It was all there. Her husband's promise, locked away and almost forgotten, but ironclad. A loophole, a shield, a lifeline. Sable leaned closer, tail thumping once against the floor. For the first time in days, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a spark of hope, faint but steady. She closed the locker, gathering the papers close. Grief was still there, heavy as ever, but now it mixed with purpose. She wiped her cheeks, stood up straighter. She thought of her husband, his stubbornness, his sense of honor, and let that carry her. That night, after the diner had emptied and the dishes were stacked, Sarah spread the documents on the counter for Eli to see. He read them slowly, lips pressed in a thin line, eyes bright with the glint of something close to pride. "It's more than enough," he said softly. "It might just save this place." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Sable sat between them, content and vigilant, as the diner, quiet and battered but not broken, waited for morning. Dawn broke pale and hesitant over Portland, the first sun in days. Icicles dripped along the diner's eaves, catching sparks of light that danced across the frosted window. Sarah arrived before the city woke, clutching the envelope like a shield. The world outside was still uncertain, but something inside her had shifted, a fragile hope taking root in the place where resignation once sat. She laid the old documents on the counter, spreading them out as if the words themselves could warm the room. The legal language felt dense, almost impenetrable, but Sarah read and reread the clause, sanctuary for veterans and their families, protected in perpetuity. Her husband's signature, bold and careful, stared back at her, a promise written in ink and memory. Eli arrived just after 6, Sable's nails clicking on the tile ahead of him. He nodded to Sarah, a hint of relief softening his usual wariness. She poured coffee, hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "Found something?" Eli asked, voice low. Sarah pushed the papers across. He took his time, scanning each line, pausing over the city statute. Sable waited at his heel, nose twitching, gaze steady. Finally, Eli looked up. "This could change everything," he said, "but we'll need help." They called in a favor, one of Eli's old friends from the department, now a city lawyer. He arrived an hour later, gray suit dusted with snow, sharp eyes softening when he saw the state Sarah was in. He read the documents in silence, lips moving as he traced the legal threads. When he looked up, a slow smile broke across his face. "You have more power here than you know," he said quietly. "This clause, it's ironclad. If we can get the city to recognize it, Pine State development doesn't stand a chance. But it's going to take more than paperwork. They won't give up quietly. You'll need the public on your side. Sarah's fingers tightened around her mug. What do I do? Tell the story, Eli said, the words coming easier than he expected. Let people see what this place means. Remind them what your husband built. The lawyer nodded. Social pressure works. Get the word out. I'll take care of the city. Outside, the morning brightened. Sable sat by the door, head tilted, sunlight catching the silver in his muzzle. Sarah watched him, struck by how he looked like a sentinel in a storybook, a guardian holding the line when no one else could. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. Her hands shook a little, but she opened the diner's old Facebook page. Untouched for years, she snapped a photo of Sable at the entrance, ears up, eyes wise, the diner's faded flag in the background. She uploaded it with a single line. For 47 years, Mariner's Diner has been a home for veterans and friends. We are still here. Eli watched her, then quietly offered his help. He sat at the counter, typing out a post of his own. Short, direct, just the facts. Our community is under threat. Mariner's Diner isn't just a place to eat. It's a piece of our town's soul. If you have a memory, a story, a reason this place matters, let people know. Now is the time. Sable's image quickly caught attention. Comments trickled in. Old friends, regulars, even strangers from out of state who'd stopped by the diner on road trips. Memories surfaced. First dates, homecoming breakfasts, cups of coffee shared on the hardest days. People spoke of Sarah's husband, the way he'd always paid for a vet's meal, the nights he stayed late for anyone who needed to talk. The local news picked up the story by noon. A reporter arrived, camera in hand, voice gentle as she interviewed Sarah beneath the neon anchor sign. Sable sat at her feet, calm and regal, his presence grounding her through every question. When the camera panned to the diner's walls, photos of veterans, love notes scrawled on napkins, medals left behind as tokens of thanks. The meaning of the place became undeniable. In the kitchen, Eli worked alongside Sarah, helping her prep for a lunch rush she didn't expect. The phone rang non-stop, people asking how to help, offering donations, sharing old stories. The air grew thick with energy, hope swirling with the scent of coffee and cinnamon. But it wasn't all support. Pine State's lawyers sent another warning, threats couched in legal jargon. The online harassment escalated, anonymous messages, phone calls late into the night. Still, Sarah felt something had shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. Her grief, once silent and private, had become communal, a thread weaving her back into the fabric of the town. Sable never strayed far. He watched the doors, tail wagging for each new face. Some visitors brought banners, others hot meals or handwritten notes. A few simply stood in the corner, eyes misty, soaking in the place one last time, just in case. Late that night, after the last dish was washed, Sarah and Eli sat together in the empty diner. Sable dozed between them, paws twitching as he dreamed. Sarah looked at the founding documents spread across the counter, the stack of supportive letters piling up beside them. She let herself believe, for the first time in weeks, that the diner might survive. Not because of legal jargon, or because her husband's memory demanded it, but because a promise made in love had been remembered by many. Hope, she realized, was not a solitary thing. It needed witnesses. It needed keepers. Outside, the snow melted away from the windows. Inside, the lights stayed on long after the town went dark. By morning, something had shifted in Portland, Maine. The story of Mariner's Diner, Sarah's struggle, Eli's watchfulness, Sable's silent loyalty, had spread further than anyone expected. The local paper ran the headline, "Sanctuary at Risk, Will Mariner's Diner Survive?" Underneath, Sable's photograph, his eyes steady and proud, captured what words couldn't: a sense of endurance, a promise not to yield. It started quietly, as most miracles do. A few regulars showed up before sunrise, shoveling the sidewalk, stringing a hand-painted banner between the streetlights, "You belong here." One by one, strangers became neighbors, neighbors became friends. Someone brought a box of muffins. Someone else dropped off a coffee urn. Sarah found herself hugged by people she didn't recognize but who knew her story, her husband's name, and the sacredness of a place that remembered the forgotten. As the morning wore on, cars lined the block. Families came with children who traced their fingers along the faded photos on the walls. Veterans, some in their 70s, some barely adults, arrived in dress blues or old field jackets, their eyes shining. They swapped stories at the counter, about battlefields and homecomings, but mostly about kindness. The meals Sarah's husband had paid for in silence, the late-night rides home, the birthday cakes, the quiet listening. For once, nobody talked about what was lost. They talked about what had endured. Eli moved among them, his presence steady. Sable trailed him, accepting gentle pats, snuffling at outstretched hands, posing for photos beside the anchor-shaped clock. The dog had become a kind of mascot, a walking testament to second chances and steadfastness. Every child wanted to meet him. Every veteran paused to say thanks, voice thick with meaning. By noon, the diner buzzed with the noise of a dozen conversations. Donations piled on the counter, envelopes stuffed with bills, checks addressed simply to Hope, hand-knitted scarves, a box of homemade cookies with "Stay Strong" scrawled in blue icing. College students offered to set up a GoFundMe. A high school choir crowded by the windows and sang "America the Beautiful," their voices sweet and strong above the clink of dishes. Sarah worked the kitchen, overwhelmed and a little dazed. Grief, she realized, could be diluted by joy, if only for a moment. She moved through the crowd, cheeks flushed, smiling through tears as she heard again and again, "You saved me once," or "This place gave me my life back." She held the hands of mothers, grandfathers, strangers, letting their stories fill the cracks left by loss. But not all the news was good. The harassment hadn't stopped. The phone still rang at odd hours, each call a shadow creeping along the edges of hope. One morning, Sarah found another garbage bag split across the alley, the lock to the storeroom scratched deep. Sable barked at the mess, tail stiff, every sense on edge. Eli doubled the patrols, organizing a watch among the town's veterans and college kids. Someone was always nearby, on the steps, across the street, keeping an eye out. There were tense moments. A stranger lingering too long by the back door, a car circling the block, voices rising in the alley. Each time Sable bristled, Eli stepped forward, and the crowd stood a little taller. Sarah learned she didn't have to be brave alone. The community, once so fractured, so silent, had found its voice. Late that week, the story went statewide. News vans pulled up at dawn, reporters eager for a soundbite, a shot of Sable in his harness, of Sarah pouring coffee for a room full of veterans. The diner became a symbol of home, of memory, of the ways ordinary people guard what matters. At night, Sarah lay in bed and listened to the quiet, marveling at the hundreds of messages pouring in from across the country. "We need a Mariner's Diner in our town. Don't give up, you're not alone." Through it all, Sable remained Sarah's silent shield. When the world crowded in, he pressed close, his warmth a steady anchor. When Sarah's hands shook, he offered his paw, gaze unwavering. He was a reminder that loyalty didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stayed. On Saturday, the diner overflowed. Supporters spilled onto the sidewalk holding banners. "Protect our sanctuary." "Veterans matter." "We stand with Sarah." Inside, Eli coordinated shifts: who would stand watch, who would help in the kitchen, who would escort Sarah to her car. The threats were still real, but so was the protection. And in that swelling tide, something changed for Eli too. The numbness that had settled after his wife's passing, the hollow ache that had followed him from war to widowhood, began to soften. He saw it in the faces gathered around him, in the laughter, the music, the way strangers found each other over pie and coffee. For the first time in years, he belonged, not because he wore a badge, but because he stood for something larger than himself. As dusk fell, the community circled the diner in the cold, candles glowing in their hands. Sarah stepped outside, flanked by Eli and Sable. The crowd cheered. Sarah lifted her face to the light, her voice steady at last. "We're still here," she said, "and we're not leaving." Sable barked once, a sound of hope, and the night answered him with applause. The city council chamber hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. By the time Sarah, Eli, and Sable arrived, sunlight streaming through the cold glass doors, a line had already formed along the sidewalk, winding past news vans and camera crews. Some people clutched coffee in paper cups. Others held hand-painted signs, "A home for all," "Keep our promise," "Diners heal," "Developers steal." In the hush before the meeting, it felt as if the whole town was holding its breath. Sarah's hands shook as she tucked the founding documents into her purse. Eli walked at her side, his posture calm, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Sable moved with a quiet grace, tail low, pressing against Sarah's leg every few steps. He wore his badge and harness, but it was his calm presence, so steady, so certain, that helped Sarah breathe. Inside, the council chamber buzzed. Old veterans found seats in the front row, hands clasped tightly. A group of high school students in choir sweaters stood along the wall, faces hopeful, nervous. Reporters set up tripods, the air full of whispered instructions and the crackle of microphones. Sarah could feel the weight of every eye in the room. For a second, she wished she was anywhere else, back in her kitchen, wiping flour from her hands, Sable dozing at her feet. But she stayed. The meeting started in the usual way. Roll call, dry voices reading from the agenda. Pine State Development's representative, a tall man with a perfect tie and a practiced smile, was the first to speak. He described progress, revitalization, the good of the city. He called the diner outdated, the land underutilized. He pointed to graphs and numbers, never looking at the faces in the room. Eli listened, jaw tight. He knew this language, the way it turned stories into data, homes into checkboxes. Sable lay at his feet, chin on his paws, eyes never leaving Sarah. When it was her turn, Sarah stood, knees trembling. Eli nodded. Sable pressed closer. She pulled the documents from her purse, hands careful, and let her voice fill the room. She spoke not just of legal clauses and city statutes, but of memories, a husband's promise, meals served to soldiers and strangers, the quiet dignity of a place that opened its doors to anyone in need. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She simply told the truth. The veterans followed, one after another, old men and women with trembling hands and steady words. They talked about finding family at Mariner's Diner, about the only place in town where their scars weren't hidden or ignored. A woman read a letter from her son, written the night before he deployed. "If I don't come back, tell Sarah and her husband thank you for showing me kindness when I was scared." The room grew quiet, each testimony stitching the crowd tighter together. The students sang, softly, just a single verse, then sat, eyes shining. The council members listened, their expressions shifting as the weight of the community settled in. Eli took the floor last. He didn't prepare a speech. He didn't need one. His words were simple. "This isn't just about a diner. It's about keeping faith with our neighbors, with our veterans, with the promises that outlast us. When the world gets loud, we need places that remind us to listen." Sable, silent but unmistakable, pressed against Eli's leg as if to say, "Yes, this too is worth guarding." Then Pine State's lawyer tried one final angle, questioning the validity of the clause, suggesting it was outdated, that times had changed. But the evidence was clear. Sarah's husband's signature, the city statute, the witness statements, the letters, the photographs. The council's legal advisor confirmed the diner's protected status under city law. What couldn't be put into words, though, was what happened next. As the developers' team packed up their files, the council chair, an old woman with tired eyes, set aside her gavel and spoke quietly. "We cannot erase what this place means. It is, and always has been, part of our city's heart." She turned to Sarah, offering a small, weathered smile. "The claim is denied. The diner stays." A ripple ran through the room, relief, joy, applause, tears. Sarah's head dropped, her shoulders shaking not with fear, but with something like release. The veterans hugged, the students cheered. Eli put a steadying hand on Sarah's back. Sable barked once, and it echoed louder than any closing gavel. Outside, the sun had begun to set. The crowd spilled into the street, laughter rising. Strangers hugged. People took photos beneath the diner's neon sign, as if to prove to themselves that something sacred could still be kept. Sarah lingered on the steps, breath visible in the winter air. She looked at Eli, at Sable, at the faces gathered close. For the first time in months, she saw not just what had been threatened, but what had been saved. She turned the key in the diner's lock that night with a different kind of certainty. The building wasn't just safe. The promise had been kept. Winter finally loosened its hold on Portland, the snow receding in patchy blankets along the curbs. Sunlight crept into Mariner's Diner each morning now, catching dust motes and golden beams and warming the faded booths where stories had been told and retold. The neon anchor sign glowed a little brighter, as if it too had survived something. Word of the council's decision spread fast. Sarah woke to bouquets on the steps, yellow daffodils, bluebells, a battered flag folded with care. Notes tucked beneath the door said, "Thank you for staying," and "This place gave me hope when I had none." It was as if the diner had exhaled, the pressure that had threatened to crush it suddenly gone. Yet change, even good change, felt strange at first. Sarah moved slowly through the kitchen, finding new rhythms. There were more hands now. Emily, the teenage daughter of a local veteran, learned to scramble eggs and refill coffee with the same care Sarah's husband once had. She brought an energy that brightened the slow hours, humming under her breath, joking with the older regulars. Her father sometimes came by, standing in the doorway, pride flickering in his tired eyes. Sarah watched this, heart caught between past and present. She taught Emily how to fold napkins into neat fans, how to listen, really listen, to the stories that tumbled out of customers when they thought no one noticed. For Sarah, each day was a practice in letting go, just a little of her old grief, allowing new memories to gather in the cracks. Eli came by nearly every day, even on his days off. He'd sit at the counter, sometimes reading the paper, sometimes just watching Sable nap in the morning sun. There was less tension in his shoulders now, a quiet peace that settled in him the way sunlight fills an empty room. He never said as much, but the diner had become his anchor too, a place to remember and to heal. He helped when things got busy, carrying crates, fixing the door that always stuck in the spring thaw. Sarah let him, not out of necessity, but because his presence felt like an old friend settling in beside her. They spoke in the comfortable silences of people who had learned, through loss, that not every wound needs explaining. Sable had begun to slow, his muzzle now frosted with gray. He spent more time dozing beneath the big window, the sunlight pooling at his feet. The regulars saved him scraps, bacon ends, a corner of toast, sometimes a whole sausage when no one was looking. Children took turns reading to him from school books, their voices soft and careful, as if Sable could understand every word. Maybe he did. He seemed to absorb the calm, breathing out peace in every slow rise and fall of his chest. One afternoon, Emily's father brought in an old photo album. He set it gently on the counter, flipping through snapshots of soldiers at homecomings, families crowded in tight around greasy plates and strong coffee. There were dozens of photos of Sarah's husband, smiling, arms slung around shoulders, laughter captured in blurred frames. In the oldest photo, a young Eli stood in uniform, unlined and uncertain, with Sable at his feet, a much younger Sable, ears tall and alert. Sarah lingered on that page, finger tracing the outline of her husband's face, then Eli's, then Sable's. The years were folded together there, sorrow and hope pressed between glossy pages. The diner transformed quietly in the following weeks. A group of regulars, veterans, students, families, petitioned the city to recognize it as a heritage site. The application passed unanimously. A brass plaque appeared on the wall. Mariner's Diner, a sanctuary for veterans and community, Estate, 1976. The place became busier than ever, with new faces joining the old, every corner echoing with stories and laughter. Sarah sometimes caught herself standing still, just watching, Emily giggling with a customer, Eli quietly talking to a lonely veteran, Sable wagging his tail in his sleep. She felt in those moments a gratitude so sharp it ached. She had nearly lost all of this, nearly let the weight of the world close her off forever. But the world, it turned out, still wanted her to hope. Eli was honored as the diner's guardian. His photo hung next to Sarah's husband's on the wall. On the day of the dedication, Sarah handed Eli a small envelope, a letter her husband had written years before, sealed and left in the footlocker. Eli read it in silence, eyes damp, then nodded once, his hand steady on Sable's neck. Sable, too, seemed content in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. He would lift his head at the sound of laughter, settle himself at Sarah's feet when she paused to rest, and press his muzzle into Emily's hand when she rushed too fast through her chores. He was part of every story now, woven into the heart of the place. Sarah realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about carrying forward, honoring promises, letting others share the weight, allowing love and hope to outgrow the sorrow. The diner had not been saved by law or by a single act, but by the gentle accumulation of kindness, loyalty, and the belief that a promise kept can change everything. As twilight faded and the first stars blinked on over Portland, Sarah locked up for the night. Sable waited by the door, Eli lingering in the lot, Emily waving goodbye from the window. The world outside felt vast and uncertain, But inside, the diner glowed, whole, healing, and alive. When the first leaves budded along the harbor, word of Mariner's Diner had spread far beyond Portland. It started with the local papers, then radio, then a news piece shared thousands of times online. Towns in neighboring counties wrote letters to the editor, "We have a Mariner's Diner, too." Photos arrived, groups of veterans standing proudly in front of small-town diners, holding homemade banners, children with their arms around golden retrievers, and mutts with gray chins. People wrote, "We remember," or simply, "Thank you for showing us what home can mean." Sarah kept a shoebox by the register for these letters, reading them aloud to Emily when the rush slowed. Some days, Eli would stop in after shift, pouring coffee, listening quietly as Sarah shared a new story. An Iowa farmer raising money to restore a shuttered diner, a group of veterans in Vermont organizing weekly breakfasts for those living alone. These stories braided themselves into the fabric of the diner, reminders that the struggle and the hope did not end at one town's edge. The change in Portland itself was subtle but real. The diner became a touchstone, a place people gravitated to when they needed to feel the steady thrum of something good. A local reporter wrote, "Mariner's isn't just a diner, it's a salve." The article was taped in the front window, curling at the edges. Strangers visited to say thanks, to share their own burdens, or simply to feel what it was like to belong, if only for the space of a meal. Eli took on a new role, not official, never announced. He organized a group of veterans and first responders who began meeting weekly at the diner, not just to talk about war or wounds, but about living, paying bills, making amends with old friends, learning how to ask for help. Sable was always there, sprawled under the table, accepting belly rubs and silent confessions. He became the meeting's gentle center, a reason for people to sit and stay, to talk about their hardest days and let those days be witnessed by someone who understood without a word. One chilly evening, Sarah paused by the window, watching dusk settle over the street. She saw Eli out on the sidewalk, shoulders hunched in a quiet conversation with a young man in uniform. Eli's hands moved in small, careful gestures, listening more than speaking. Sarah watched them, heart tender. Eli, too, had found healing here, in the slow, uncertain act of belonging again. Sable, slower now, stayed close to Sarah. Some mornings he would rest his head on her shoe as she worked the griddle, breathing in rhythm with her steps. Emily brought him new toys, a soft blanket to lie on by the window. Local children would wave at him from the sidewalk on their way to school, calling his name, believing in the magic of an old dog who guarded the soul of a diner. Stories began to accumulate. Little ones, the kind that might not have seemed like much before. An old regular started bringing fresh bread to share with anyone who needed it. A teenage boy, once caught spray painting the back alley, returned to wash dishes and in time found a second home in the clatter and warmth of the kitchen. A mother and her son, new to town, were invited to sit with the veterans, welcomed without question. And the weight of old pain eased, little by little, with every kindness. Sarah and Eli often sat together after closing, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing the hard stories that had once felt unspeakable. She told him about the years after her husband's death, the loneliness, the small rituals that kept her upright. Eli spoke about deployments, about the darkness he'd carried, and how Sable, in his own way, had shown him the way back to daylight. One night, Sarah turned to Eli, her voice quiet but sure. "We didn't fix the world, did we?" Eli smiled, slow and honest. "No, but maybe we made a corner of it easier to live in." Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, the air shimmered with the memory of laughter, the softness of shared sorrow, the comfort of new beginnings. Sable curled at their feet, opened one eye, then closed it again. For a moment all was still. The wounds of the town, some visible, some hidden, had not vanished. But they were carried together now, a little lighter, a little less lonely. Sarah glanced at the wall, at the plaque, the photos, the folded letters, the collage of reminders that a promise kept could echo out into the world. She knew others would visit, hoping for their own taste of home, a reason to believe in second chances. And she was ready. The diner was more than safe. It was alive, a place where the smallest acts of tenderness could ripple outward, catching on hearts that needed them most. There are mornings at Mariner's Diner when the light pours through the glass just right, soft, golden, painting halos on every chipped mug and faded photograph. It's on mornings like these that Eli sometimes arrives early, pausing outside beneath the neon anchor. He stands quietly, one hand in Sable's fur, listening to the hush of the city before the world stirs. Inside, the smell of bacon and strong coffee is already thick, and Sarah hums to herself as she unlocks the till, her motions practiced, unhurried. It's the same old diner, but nothing's quite the same anymore. Every wall holds new reminders of what has been kept alive. Letters from strangers, campaign banners, snapshots of homecomings and tearful reunions, the city's official plaque, each piece another layer in the mosaic of hope. Sarah moves through the place differently now, lighter on her feet, laughter easy. Emily dances between tables, calling orders and trading smiles, her father sometimes watching from the door, pride never far from his face. Eli takes a seat at the counter, Sable settling beside him, chin on pause, eyes half-lidded in the sunbeam. There is a calmness here, a rightness, as if the diner and its people have finally settled into a story they were always meant to live. He thinks sometimes about the years that led him here, the ones lost to silence, to guilt and wandering, to a grief that used to press in with every night. He thinks about Sarah, about the weight she carried, and how she found a way to keep living, even as she learned to let go. He thinks about Sable, gray now, moving slower, but still always present. And he thinks about promises, the ones spoken and unspoken, the ones that hold when everything else falls away. On a quiet Sunday, the town gathers for a dedication. Old veterans in pressed uniforms sit beside families with children, students shoulder to shoulder with city workers. Someone brings a guitar, and a gentle hymn floats over the clatter of plates and the hum of the griddle. People share stories, some funny, some heartbreaking. One woman talks about how, years ago, she brought her mother here every Sunday because it was the only place her mother still recognized after her memory began to fade. A young man, home from deployment, stands in the doorway, unsure, until Emily pulls him in with a cup of coffee and a shy smile. Eli is asked to speak. He stands awkwardly at first, one hand never leaving Sable's head. His words are slow, unpolished, but honest. This diner was never just about food, or even about a single man's memory. It's about all of us, about keeping the promises we make to each other, sometimes quietly, sometimes when nobody's looking. It's about standing together when it's easier to turn away. My wife used to tell me, love isn't what you feel, it's what you do. I didn't always understand that, but I think I do now. He glances at Sarah, at Emily, at the regulars, and finally at Sable, whose tail thumps softly in reply. When the world feels too heavy, you find a place to rest. Sometimes you make that place. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you find people and dogs who hold you steady until you can stand again. That's what this diner is for me. I hope it's that for you too. The applause is gentle but full, a kind of communal exhale. Sarah squeezes Eli's hand as she passes, her eyes shining, her grief and joy tangled together the way roots twist beneath old trees. The rest of the day is spent in small kindnesses, a veteran's meal paid for quietly by a stranger, a child teaching Sable to high-five, Sarah showing Emily how to close the register at night. The sun dips, the city outside slowing to evening. Later, after the last plate is stacked and the last light dimmed, Eli lingers by the door with Sarah and Emily. Sable sits on the stoop, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. The world outside is wide and dark, but the diner glows against it. Bright, resilient, ordinary, extraordinary. Sarah turns the sign to closed. She says, "Thank you for not giving up on us, Eli." He smiles. "Thank you for letting me stay." As they part, Eli stands for a long moment with Sable at his side, both of them listening to the heartbeat of the empty street. He thinks about all the diners out there, all the promises being made and kept in 1,000 small ways. He wonders who needs a guardian tonight, who needs a place to be seen. If this story reaches you, he hopes you'll remember, every town has its own Mariner's Diner, a place, a person, a memory worth protecting. Maybe your kindness, your courage to listen, or your willingness to stay is the promise someone else needs to keep going. Sometimes, all it takes is one guardian, human or dog, to turn the tide. And sometimes, all it takes is the quiet bravery to stay.